Today's tutorial is going to be on how to bleach hair bundles and construct a wig cap with a sewing machine using a 6x6 closure. This is beginner friendly. So family, if not subscribed yet to my channel, please do so. Kindly like my videos if you find it useful. And please turn on your notification bell so that each time I post, you'll be notified. We are going to use the sewing machine. We are going to use the breathable dome cap, a canvas head with a tripod stand. Then we are going to use T-pins to be able to pin down the closures and then the hair nets. We are going to use clamps or butterfly clips, hair polisher to give it a bit of shine, just a bit of shine will do. And your straightener must be able to heat up to 230 degrees. We are going to use a pressing iron as well. So guys, this is the 6x6 closure that we are going to be using, and we usually refer to it as the mini closure as well. So I'm going to bleach the knots, and we are going to be bleaching the hair piece and then the closure as well. This is beginner friendly, so please pay attention so that you'll be able to get every detail as we go on. So this is the bleaching powder we are going to be using. You can use any bleaching powder of your choice, but this is what I got on the market. This powder is going to be used coupled with a developer, which is liquid. So this is the powder, and without the liquid, we'll not be able to bleach the hair. So since I'm going to be bleaching just the knots, I'm going to use a bit of the powder, and I'm going to add a bit of the developer to it. So I'm going to make sure that the developer that I'm going to add to it is not going to be a lot. If not, it will become too light and runny. And when we apply it to the knots or the nets, it's going to penetrate and then bleach the hair instead of just the knots. What we need to achieve right here is, or what we seek to achieve right here is just getting the knots to be colored. The paste shouldn't be too light. If not, it's really going to mess up your work, or it's going to touch certain parts that you wouldn't want it to touch. And it shouldn't be too thick, because if it's too thick, you wouldn't be able to spread it out on the net, and you wouldn't be able to touch the places you would like it to touch. So I'm using a knife. I'm using a disposable plastic knife to spread out the paste, because I don't want to use the brush, because when you use the brush, you are likely to press onto it, and the paste is going to penetrate and touch the hairs on the other side of the net. So that's why I just stick to the knife, so that I'll be able to spread it gently onto the net. But if you are comfortable with the brush, you can use that as well. But I'm going to be using the brush to color or to bleach the hair piece. So this is what I prefer using. And for beginners, I think it should be okay to use the knife or the plastic knife to spread out the paste. Make sure that you mix the powder and then the developer thoroughly before application. If not, you will get certain parts of the knots bleached and certain parts not bleached. And I'm going to place the knots, or where I apply the paste onto, or the bleach onto, I'm going to place it on top of a plastic so that it will bleach faster. Each time you want your hair to bleach faster, you place it in a plastic bag or cover it with a plastic or aluminum foil. So here, this is the hair piece I'm going to be using, and I'm going to bleach it as well. So I'm just putting it together before I start the process, because if you are not careful and you don't bleach it as fast as you can, or apply the mixture as fast as you can, you have some bleach faster than the others. So I want to prevent that. So I'm going to put them together and then apply it as fast as I can. So here I'm using a plastic bag. I'm spreading it out so that it doesn't touch my surface. What you should note is that the more developer that you add to the powder, the faster it will bleach. So in bleaching this particular hair, the hair pieces, I decide to add a lot of the developer to it. So my paste now becomes very runny or very light. So when I apply it, it bleaches faster than normal. Because if I'm to make the paste thicker, it's going to take a longer time for the hair to bleach. So I add more of the developer. As you can see, one of the hair pieces was inside the paste and it's really bleached fast. Yeah, so if you want it to bleach faster, you can make the developer more than the powder. But if you don't want that and you want it to take a while to bleach, then you can make the powder and then the developer thick. Per my observation, I think it's better to use more of the developer than the powder so that you'll be able to apply it to a lot of hair. But if you make the paste thick, I'm afraid you'll not be able to bleach a lot of hairs with that same quantity. You'll be using a lot of powder and the developer as well. But when I first applied the bleach to the knot, I didn't wash it out. I just waited a few minutes before applying the bleach to the hair piece. So that's what I'm doing right here. So I'm going to wash it together as well as the other hairs. If you're not experienced, please and please, you need to use gloves. So you can see how my hair is turning out. The knots are bleached. The hair piece is also bleached. But I didn't even place this in the plastic. But you can tell that it's changing color already. So it depends on you. If you apply a lot of developer to it, then it means you have to be very careful. If you are to place it in the plastic, then it means it's going to be bleached faster than normal. So you have to be very careful. And as you do it, you have to pay much attention to it because you can easily forget and then it will over bleach. And when the hair over bleaches, it will spoil the quality or the texture of the hair piece. And you are going to have it looking very off and you have a lot of split ends. And I bet you don't want your hair to be looking that way. So you just have to be cautious or mindful when you are bleaching hair. And to every hair and its texture, you must know that the texture and how long you must bleach the hair. If the hair is of a very good quality, then you can keep it, you can leave the bleach in for a longer time. So you have to also be mindful of that when it comes to bleaching. It's not every hair that is strong enough to hold bleach in for a long time. If not, your hair is going to become weak. As soon as the hair is bleached, I'm going to wash the bleach out of the hair with water and I'm going to dry it before I proceed. But you can choose to use the closure while it's wet. So guys, this is the outcome of the 6x6 closure that I bleached early on. You can tell that the knots have been bleached. And this is how the hair too looks. Okay. And this is how the hair piece also looks. This is what it looks like. I deliberately bleached it to look this way. I didn't want the hair to have a uniform color. So that's why it looks this way. This is the breathable or mesh dome cap. It has holes in it. And this canvas head is a 23-inch block head. At this point, we are going to be adjusting the closure. And with a 6x6, you have to be very mindful of how you adjust it. If not, you have certain parts raised. You must make sure it's as flat as possible. So at this point, we are going to be using the T-pins to adjust it. So you make sure that the front line or the hairline exceeds the net. You make sure you don't drag it behind the net. It has to come after the net. Usually it's very difficult to get the 6x6 closure to lie flat. So you have to keep adjusting it till you get it. And when you are sewing, that is when you make sure that you straighten it out. So maybe when you're adjusting it, you may not get it perfectly. But you have to make sure that when you are sewing it, you get it right. If not, when you are done, you're going to have the closure parts lifted and it wouldn't lie flat on your head. I'm using the T-pin on the net of the closure so that it wouldn't shift backwards. And I'm still trying to make it flat. So this time around, I'm sewing the closure, but I make sure I sew from the top so that I'll be able to stretch out the closure as I sew. And these stitches that I'm making are called blanket stitches. And I make sure that I loop it. I'm not using running stitches for this particular type because it doesn't stay long. Running stitches easily come out. So I'm sewing from the top and then I loop it. I go in with a needle and then I loop. I go from top to down and then I loop. So I make sure I sew from side to side so that I can stretch it out. I also make sure that I sew a bit of each side, but I don't sew from one end to the other end. If not, it wouldn't be able to stretch out. So as I sew, I make sure I still stretch out the cap so that I don't have the closure folding up. I'm going to be using this method from start to finish. So I'm just going to make sure that my closure is as flat as possible. That is what I seek to achieve. And I make sure that the stitches are as close as possible. If you make your stitches widely spaced, then there might be a problem. When you stitch your hair pieces to the net, you're going to have some parts raised. So as you stitch, you just make sure that you straighten it out. So when I get to the corners of the closure, I make sure that I stretch it out more than usual so that I can get the back side to lie flat. So I make sure I stitch and then I drag it towards the sides before I start sewing to meet at a point. Whatever I do on the right side, I apply the same method and technique to the other side. So you make sure that you stitch until you get to a point where the stitches meet and you tie knots. So your knots can be 2 or 3. That depends on you. But they should be firm enough not to come off. And each time you cut a thread, you should make sure that at least you have a tail. So now I'm marking the places I'm going to be stitching the hair pieces onto. I'm using a crayon, so you can use whichever marker that works for you. But a crayon can easily be wiped off. So I mark from bottom to top, and I make sure that as I get to the top or closer to the closure area, I make sure that the tracks are going to be closer than it is at the bottom. Unless, of course, you have a lot of hair pieces or tracks that you want to sew, then you can make it very close from bottom to top. But my hair isn't much, so I'm just going to make sure that from the occipital area to the crown area, or where the closure is, I'm going to make the tracks closer than at the nape area. So here I'm doubling my tracks. I double my tracks before I stitch onto the net. This will prevent shrinkage of the cap. Too many stitches on a cap when using a sewing machine will cause it to shrink, unless of course you are using your hands to stitch and you know the technique to use to prevent the cap from shrinking. So this is what the cap looks like, or my demarcations on the cap look like. But before I stitch, I had some space at the occipital area, so I just make sure I take half an inch off, because I'm using the block head size 23 and I had a little bit of space there. And this for the client, the head size is 23 inches, so I'm just taking half an inch off. So I'm going to begin stitching onto the net, and I'm going to sew my doubled tracks onto each line. Each time I sew my wefts or tracks onto the net, I make sure I don't sew on the band to start with. And when I'm stitching the tracks, I make sure I go back and forth from the beginning and at the end of each track to secure my tracks. If you do not do so, you're going to have it coming off at the ends, which I bet you wouldn't like. So you just have to be cautious and make sure that you don't sew on the band as well at the beginning, but on the sides of the net, you can sew onto the band. I decided to do this so that I can have my cap stretch out. Even when it comes to gluing, that's the technique I use so that my cap can easily stretch out. And as you can see, I go back and forth before I finally sew the tracks onto each demarcation. And at the end of each track, I make sure I sew back and forth again to secure my tracks. So I'm going to do the same thing over and over again until I get to the last track. I'm going to use the same technique until I get to the end. And as you keep doing this, you have to stretch out the cap, but you don't have to open it up in such a way that when you are done, it's going to cause the cap to be bigger. I just straighten it out on the surface in order to be able to get it flat on the net. Sometimes the hair can get caught up, but you'd have to gently take it out, or you stretch it in such a way that it doesn't get caught up. If not, you're going to break your needles. Because this machine is actually for clothes, but we are just improvising, so you have to be very careful when you are stitching. If not, you're going to use so many needles. This is the finished product of our wig, and the closure is a bit wavy on the hair, but I'm going to use the water in the spray bottle to tame it a bit, and then when it dries up, I'm going to be using a flat iron to straighten it out. This is where you can apply your leave-in conditioner to it to soften it a bit before you dry it, and then straighten it with the flat iron. So at this point, we are going to cut the net beneath the closure. We're going to cut it off. But you have to be careful. You have to place your hand in between the net and then the closure so that you don't cut the closure. So you have to be very careful at this point. So I'm going to gently cut off the net. I'm going to leave a little bit of allowance. Ta-da! This is what we have. So this is how it's supposed to look. So this time around, I'm going to place it back onto the block head or the mannequin head, and we are going to tweeze. You can choose to tweeze before constructing the wig cap, or you can tweeze after constructing the wig cap. But you need water to do this. You just need water to make it softer so that you don't end up tearing the hair or the strands. We are going to go line by line and tweeze. The reason why I do this is because you'd want it to be lighter as you go. But if you don't go line after line to tweeze, you end up tweezing the initial ones or the frontal ones, and you have it looking funny. So that's why I tweeze line after line, to be able to achieve a more uniform look at the end. When tweezing, you'd have to hold the tweezer firmly, and you are supposed to pull it, hold the hair firmly and drag it. But you have to just make sure that the strands don't tear. So it's more like you're picking from the roots, you're holding firmly at the roots and pulling it out. So that's how it's supposed to look. So we are going to repeat the same procedure line after line until you get to a point where you don't want to tweeze anymore. But it depends on how light you'd want your closure to look or your hairline to look. So that depends solely on you. Some people want theirs fuller at the front, others want theirs lighter. So it solely depends on you. Don't forget to wet the hair as you go so that the strands don't tear. Tweezing takes time, so you'd have to be patient if you want it looking well tweezed. So as at now, this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to take off the ones that I want to take off as at now, the ones that are out of place. And I'm going to lighten the hairline a bit just to make it look more natural. So I just make sure I don't pluck everything out, but I'm trying to make the hairline as light as possible. But I'm just making sure that I don't make it too light. I just want to have it looking natural. But don't be scared. Whenever you pluck, you're going to have a whole lot of hair coming off. That shouldn't be a problem at all. I'm just taking off the little knots that are out of place. So I made a middle part and I'm tweezing it a bit so that I can make the pattern more defined. So I just make sure I don't tweeze too much. If not, I'm going to have a wider pattern, which wouldn't look too good. I'm just going to tweeze the edges a little bit more, a little, to make it look more natural. I'm going to use a flat iron to straighten out the weave. I prefer using that for long hair before I use the straightener. This will make the hair very straight and silky. So that's why I prefer using the flat iron, the iron we use for clothes, before I use the straightener. The iron for clothes is able to heat above 230 degrees. So it's able to make the hair very, very straight. You have to be careful in so doing in order not to burn the hair. This iron has been specially set aside for this job. So I don't use the same iron I use for my clothes for the hair. But you can if it's not something you do on a daily basis. I'm going to be ironing line by line or track by track in order to be able to get each hair straight. I wouldn't want to iron everything together. So therefore, I make sure I do it track by track so that I'll be able to get every strand. As I iron, I make sure that I comb it before I straighten and after I straighten it with the flat iron. And I make sure I put pressure on the iron and able to get it to be very flat. I'm very particular when it comes to the ends of the hair because that side easily rolls up and you might have a lot of split ends there, so you need to put pressure at the ends. This is the part I haven't straightened versus the part I have straightened with the flat iron, and you can tell there's a difference. So from what you see, you can tell that it's looking very straight. It just looks like the same way a straightener will straighten hair. But as I said earlier, this is what I do before I straighten the top part where the iron can't really do justice to. So at the end of everything, I'm just going to use a straightener to straighten the closure part and then the top part of the hair. So this is it. Just see how beautiful it looks. And we are not through yet. See how bouncy the hair is. And you can testify that the iron also does justice to the hair. But this technique is very good for long hair. I'm adjusting it onto the block head or the mannequin head so that I can do the final styling. So I'm just going to straighten the closure part and then lay the edges with my wax and hot comb. And we are through. I just decided to add a bit of hair polisher to it, just a drop, but it's by choice. You can choose to use it or not to use it. But I just want to give it a little shine. And usually when you bleach hair, the hair becomes more dry. So it's either you treat the hair before you use the hair, or you can use a bit of the hair polisher to give it a bit of shine, as you can see. I'm applying the wax to the edges and I'm heating up my hot comb. And I'm going to use it to lay the edges so that they can lie flat. But we're almost through. And the hair already looks beautiful. And guys, don't forget to cut out the excess thread when you are done stitching. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to capture that. But when you are done, you're going to have extra threads flying in the hair. So you have to make sure that you cut them out. Guys, the hair looks natural, doesn't it? And at this point, if you haven't subscribed, you haven't liked or left a comment, please don't forget to do so. And if you have any suggestion, kindly leave it in the comment section below. And my email address is pinned. So you can send me an email if you have any questions to ask. And I'll be willing to assist you. I'm so grateful for your time and I hope you come back here next time and see what I have to offer. Hope this video was a blessing to you. And I hope to bring you more and more interesting videos that will help you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And don't forget to share this with your friends as well.